it's my pleasure to go ahead and introduce our presenters for today, Josh Thomas and Vivek Mano, who will be going ahead to go through this presentation with you. Once again, give them your questions in that Q&A, and I'll go ahead and pass it off to them. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Diane. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today from what appears to be all over the world. So if you're staying up late or waking up early, we appreciate you listening to our webinar. As Diane mentioned, my name is Vivek Mano, and I'm a product marketing manager here at Ionic. With me today, I've got Josh Thomas, our Portals products manager.
Hello.
Thank you, Josh. And today, we're here to talk all about Ionic Portals and our latest discoveries when it comes to micro frontends. After our initial launch about 6 or 8 months ago, we heard from the community there was a huge need for enabling micro frontends architecture for other mobile development frameworks. And over again, React Native kept bubbling to the top. So today we're going to walk through how companies achieve micro frontends for mobile, just in general, kind of an overview of how that's done today in the workplace. And then we'll step into some specific feedback we've received when it comes to React Native development teams trying to do this on their own. Then we'll turn things over to Josh, who's going to provide a live demo of how this can be achieved. And as many of you said, we're going to share the magic of how this works. And then we'll wrap things up at the very end with a Q&A session. And we're very excited to hear your questions and your comments and your additional thoughts on why you're here to learn about micro frontends for React Native and what problems you're trying to solve as well. We do have one more poll question coming up. We'll prompt you for that, but keep an eye out for that feature in Zoom and provide us with honest feedback. As questions do pop up, please use the Q&A function, and we'll handle all of that at the very end. So we're all here today because we've made a decision, we've chosen a cross-platform mobile app development framework in order to save on time and resources. But even with this decision, scaling enterprise mobile apps can be difficult. And that's due to a number of factors, with some common challenges including just not being able to ship fast enough. I've yet to meet a product manager or business owner who believes that they're clearing through their feature backlog fast enough. And instead, they believe they're just not only not shipping fast enough, but they're letting down their users and the user experience by not getting these features out to market quickly. We found that mobile development teams can be few in their headcount when compared to some of the other software development teams. And their work winds up being siloed from the rest of the organization. Well, what that means is that features that have been built elsewhere already, like for the web or elsewhere, can't be immediately transferred to the mobile development team, and vice versa. Building your features in React Native or native code doesn't translate over to other parts of the organization. So that silo effect just adds up to wasted inefficiencies. And linked to this, web teams typically do have greater headcount when it comes to just raw resources and numbers. And so their roadmaps are moving along much further and faster as compared to the mobile teams. And kind of all of that in play, the business owners we talk to want to fix these issues in any way possible. And just to kind of walk through what we're observing with mobile development teams, they're working on a single feature at a time, working through a narrow pipe, if we can look at it that way. And this team is typically shorthanded, and they're in charge of everything, not just the new features, but refining the user experience, squashing bugs, and all of that leads to bottlenecks and delays, missed deadlines, and a general lack of feature parity when it comes to the mobile app compared to the web app. What we have determined could be a great solution or right approach is to break things up and assign specific features to specific teams, freeing up the mobile team to focus on the mobile specific user experience. So that allows them to move faster and scale their development while features are available on all platforms at once. And best of all, these teams are able to build and ship in parallel autonomously and without stepping on each other's toes. This is the promise of micro frontends in general. And what we've, and Josh specifically, and a lot of other people at Ionic have decided to do is to dive into how can we make this work for mobile and how can we bring this reality to React Native. Now, we're pretty opinionated on this point, and if anybody knows Ionic, we believe that the web is the best and the only real way to solve for this. And of course, by web, I'm referring to web views. So how are companies achieving this today? How are they solving this? Embedded web views take advantage of the native browser component. These are provided by Apple and Google, and they're part of the native SDKs. And because it's widely used in mobile app development, web views can be used to display both internal and external web content. We'll dive into this in just a moment. And what's most exciting about this is that you can potentially reuse existing web content and apps within your React Native applications. So just give an example of what I'm talking about an embedded web view. Let's bring up the Netflix application. And it's not a novel feature we're talking about. In fact, I've seen a large majority of mobile apps take advantage of embedded web views. Netflix over here, they serve up web-based content, but retain the native navigation. And their help.netflix.com content is pulled in dynamically, and it's entirely web-based. It looks seamless, it looks great, but it's a part of the native shell application. Not all of us are lucky enough to have the resources or bandwidth that Netflix does. And so a lot of the companies we've talked to as we do customer research go around the do-it-yourself path. They want to build this themselves because the technology looks great. I just mentioned it's a part of the native mobile SDKs. Now the question is, how do I make this a reality for my company and for myself? So alluding to what we talked about Netflix, the first step companies seem to take is to work with server-hosted content. That means you literally point to a web server elsewhere in order to retrieve your in-app content. And this gives you full feature parity with your site because, well, you're pointing and embedding a web page into your app. But the problem here is that we make the assumption that websites or a lot of the mobile devices are similar and akin to websites, where websites have a stable internet connection. And this isn't as safe an assumption in the mobile world because the server-hosted content could be a problem for us due to network latencies or offline support. And on top of that, making that web page and that server-hosted content look and feel like a part of the native application takes quite a bit of work and maintenance. It's really easy to do a less than optimal job, which leads to a poor user experience on the whole. So people have been extending web views and trying to find new ways to make it work over time. And the common evolution has been to shift from the server-hosted content to now going on device and device-hosted content. And why not put all the files on device and load them that way? And what this would look like is having your web code built into your React Native application. And with every new build, you'd coordinate with the web teams to pull in the latest files. And that way you're up to date with regards to your web views. Over time, this starts to become a difficult process because the maintenance of web code requires additional work and coordination. Teams can't work independently, need to go physically back and forth between native and web dev offices to manage files. And furthermore, when you jump into a web view, you need to determine how to pass the data between your React Native views and your web views, like authentication tokens and plugin compatibility. All these little minute details need to be solved for and figured out. The way I've explained it, the way I think about it personally, it's like walking through a door into an entirely different room, and you need to decide what to bring with you and how to bring it in the most secure manner. Now, as you build solutions to solve for this, it's going to inherently open up security risks. So your team needs to stay up to date and totally sharp on how you're managing this between your React Native builds and your web code versions. So just to kind of sum it up, what we're talking about is that people believe in the promise of micro frontends for mobile. They see other companies manage this themselves. They go down the do-it-yourself path and run into a number of issues. And so the reality and trying to build this yourself and do it yourself is that it's time consuming and really costly to maintain. So teams need to spend more time ensuring that the dependencies and versions are matching with their native shell, the React Native shell code base. You need to manually coordinate React Native releases with the web code. And that can turn into a really cumbersome process. And honestly speaking, we've seen that lead to teams stepping on each other's toes and preventing a high quality app from being shipped faster. There's also inherent security risks and vulnerabilities. Passing of tokens and other shared experiences opens up security risks if not handled properly. One thing we haven't touched on yet is that when you do jump into that web view, you typically lack native feature access from the web. And that means you can't access some specific device features you might want in that new experience you've created. Building a new feature that requires access to the camera or geolocation just isn't easy to manage and easy to work with. So that's something you have to solve for when you build this yourself. And then the understated human component to all of this is determining the right level of access for that web view. Which APIs can be used, and then coupled with that, how teams can ship independently of each other, that really becomes a challenge. And so we've identified these as the reality of problems that customers have that the customers have faced when they try to build this themselves. Diana, I think we're ready to ask another question. I'm curious to hear from the audience. Does this resonate with you? And how does this fit in? Diana.
Okay, here we go, everyone. If you could please go ahead and reference your screens once again. We're gonna launch that second poll here. So you should be seeing that on your screens now. So we have a few more options for you in this poll, but I'll go ahead and leave this open for a few seconds here so everyone can participate. And once again, thank you so much for everyone that does provide their feedback. We greatly, greatly appreciate it. So thank you.
Just a note, if somebody does mark other, throw your comments in the chat or the Q&A. We'd love to find out what challenges you faced and if any of these pain points resonate with you.
I'll be closing that poll here soon. So if you haven't already, please go ahead and participate. We'll go ahead and share those results a little bit later on with you, but I'll be closing that now. Thanks so much, everyone, for your participation.
Thanks, Diana. So again, we talked about the fact that we believe React Native teams need to ship faster, deliver more, clear their feature backlog, meet the needs of the business owners. Micro frontends is a potentially great way to solve this problem. We see companies trying to build do-it-yourself solutions, and unfortunately, the reality of do-it-yourself solutions are that you face many more problems than you might have intended to, and a lot more questions pop up of how it's going to be solved. And that's where we believe the answer is Ionic Portals. Ionic Portals allows development teams to easily coordinate and manage embedded web experiences. And through that, we believe that React Native development teams can fully realize the potential of micro frontends for their applications. I truly do believe it's better to see it before we really dive into the features and functionality. And Josh, I think it's about time you show everybody how Portals works and why we're so positive on the fact that this can help our React Native community ship faster.
All right, let's go.
I'm going to turn the screen over to you.
Okay, with the release of Portals for React Native, we've made it easy not just to integrate web-based experience into native applications, but also to empower web developers. So today, I want to show you what it takes to add Portals to your React Native application. So here's the demo I'm going to be running through. This is a very simple setup. I just did React Native init. So it's the base starter that you get. We're not using TypeScript in this, but we do ship types in all of our code. And I'm going to give this very minimal approach so that we can understand how to add portals to your React Native app and how to facilitate communication between your web code and your React Native code. And I'll show the web code as well. And the web application is also incredibly minimal. We have a button inside of it that when you click it, it increments a counter. And every time that counter gets incremented, it passes the data through a pub sub process back to React Native, which updates its own state and displays it on the page. So first, let's do a little bit of housekeeping on the demo. So this is the demo code. It's Ionic-team React Native Portals webinar demo. This is public. If anyone wants to pull it down, follow along, or if you want to look at it later, it's available here. We have instructions that on our docs site that I'm going to go through a few of these steps, but if you want to read along later, you can go to using portals in React Native, and that's on ionic.io/doc/portals. And the other thing I want to touch on is that this repository I'm showing off is a mono repo. That is only for the purpose of it's easier to show a demo this way across web and React Native. There is no specific reason why it has to be structured this way. It's just easiest for me, okay? So let's take a look. We have React Native and web both here. So let's bring up VS Code. Here you can see that I've already got this application open in VS Code. And the first thing we're going to do is we go into React Native Portals webinar demo, packages React Native, and we'll do an npm install Ionic / Portals React Native. So I'm not actually going to run that because it's already installed. But let's take a look at the code and assume that that is installed. We're going to go down to the first index file here. And you can see that we're importing from Portals React Native 2 methods, add portal and register. So this registration is required for Portals, but this key is available to everyone. And you can use Portals in development without needing anything from us other than this code. And we're going to define our first portal here, and this is called the count portal. The only thing that's really required in order to define a portal is 2 things. We've got to give it a name, and we've got to give it a location. And when it says start directory, that is the location. And that is where within the native application bundle, we will find the HTML, CSS, and JS that is required to display the web view. After we've done so, we're going to add the portal. So now that we've created the portal, we've registered it. Let's take a look at and see this application running in Xcode before I actually add that portal to a view.
Josh, just to kind of pause and summarize what you've done, you were just showing the code to a React Native app that you just spun up from the React Native starter, and you're literally opening up a section of the code for this portal for web code. And now you're going to kind of show us what it looks like.
Exactly.
Right.
Okay, we see Metro started.
There it is.
And Metro is running, and we're going to see the code running here in just a second whenever it decides to display. Okay, here we go. And like I said, this is the template. I'm assuming that most React Native developers have probably seen this at least once in their life. So let's go back to VS Code. We'll drag it over to the side so we can see this running. And let's go to the main component that's being displayed in this native application. And that is the app component. And down here in the app component, we're adding portal view. And I currently have it commented out, which is why you don't see it here, but you can see that portal view is just imported from Ionic Portals React Native. Let's go back. Let's comment out. Uncomment portal view. Okay, and here you can see we're now showing the portal view as part of the React Native application. And as I click this, it's incrementing. So one of the things to note here when I added the portal view, there is a name and a style. And the name is the same name that we provided to it when we defined the portal initially. So we're saying, let's include a view, this portal view component, and let's include the count portal as part of that. Okay. So now we know how to add a portal. Let's take a look at it from the web side. What's the web code actually need to look like to be able to be included as a portal? So here's the web code. And this is just a very simple, again, the first starter of a React web application. And we can see here, it's I'm using strict, I'm including app, and literally this is the entire application we're looking at right now. So it has a div that has a button inside of it that says add one to count, and count is part of state. And whenever I click the button, it's publishing through our pub subsystem, provided a topic and the data that we want to display. But let's just show how this is completely independent. As you look at this, there really isn't much of a tie to the React Native application. It's an independent application. So let's take a look. And let's just show that this is a completely separate app. So here you can see that I started the React application, and here it is being displayed within a browser.
Josh, are you trying to tell me, let me just quickly summarize that too, because that's super fascinating. You've effectively got a fully encapsulated, separate React web application running right now. A simple one, but you have a React web app running.
Exactly.
Almost no code changes to get that integrated into your React Native application.
Right. The only thing that we really care about and what's important here is the facilitating the communication back and forth. Other than that, they truly are completely separate applications. The web application doesn't need to be written in a specific style to be able to be displayed in React Native. I use React here because I'm going to make an assumption that most shops or most companies using React Native probably have React Web as well. But if you want to use Angular, you can use Angular. If you want to use Vue, Svelte, Solid, whatever. It doesn't. We're not opinionated on the web stack that you want to use to be included into your React Native app.
That's interesting. Yeah, I want to call something out too here, and it's always a demo effect, but you know what happens. We've got two misspelled in there, and one of the problems I talked about when we were doing device hosted content is that if you're going to build your own web view, you've got to bundle in that web code every single time you have a new build. So if you make a mistake, like we see a little mistake on the button here, that has to kick off a whole new build. How do you solve that? That sounds like kind of a nuisance just to fix a little typo.
Well, right. I mean, how would you do this if this were React Native code? You would make the change to your application, and the next time you do a release of your native bundle, you would include it as part of the native bundle, go through the review process, and deploy a new version of your native application. But in this case, it's a little different. And I misspelled two on purpose, right? But you can make a change to your web code, which is actually a completely separate application. And you can run it through our live update process. So I can actually do a deployment of this web code without having to do a new release of my native application. And that's important because we're creating a technology here that allows you to complete a separation between one part of the application and the rest of the application, right? In typical micro front-end fashion, that's what's important. It's important that you have these separations and you allow for teams to move independently. So by allowing for this deployment through live updates of this web application, we've now given this team autonomy to do deployments on their own timeline without having to coordinate with the main shell React Native application.
So, I mean, I'm the marketing person here, so I'm going to try to think of it a different way. Does that mean when a user reloads a React Native app, it's possible to just automatically get the latest web content that's device hosted, not server hosted?
Correct.
Wow. Okay.
That's the objective with this, right? Is that we want it on device because we want to get rid of the problems with hosted content, which is feeling less than native, right? We want it to be there immediately when it's asked for and displayed within a portal, but that causes challenges. And how do we overcome that challenge of reducing the latency? We want it on device. So anytime you make a change, you can do a deployment through live update, and the application pulls that change down when it's needed and updates the actual local code. Now, it might seem complicated, right? What would it take in order to add live updates to this native application? But because live updates is something that's core to portals, it's actually quite simple. I know that simple is an overloaded term in tech, but I'm going to use it anyway. So let's go back to our React Native application. We'll open up the index file where we created the reference to the count portal.
Since you're right here, Josh, I do have a
Yep.
question I'm going to ask in real time.
Yep.
You go back. The question is, how do we declare the portal's origin? And I think you have it there in the start dir, but I want to make sure.
That's it.
Yep.
Yep. It's the start dir. And we have a process in place in the building of the iOS application that copies the files in.
Got it.
So that's the process I'm using here because it's easiest, but we actually have another process in place where we can use the Ionic CLI to download the most recent version of the live update and include it as part of the native application. And that's really what we would prefer people use going forward. But back to defining the live update.
Yeah.
So here I'm providing it an app ID and a channel. And the default channel is production, but since I've added my web app to AppFlow live updates, I need to define the app ID, and then I say sync on add. So ask for the most recent updates anytime this portal is added to the application. And that's it. You've now added live updates.
That's kind of incredible. I think, yeah, we got some really great questions we're going to tackle at the end here. But yeah, I'm going to guess I'll give the audience a little bit of time to think about this and ask more questions. But yeah, that's awesome. Is there anything else you wanted to show in this demo?
Yep, there's something else I wanted to show, and that is the pub sub process.
Yeah, great.
So here you can see whenever I click the button update count, we're calling portals.publish, and we're giving it a topic and the data. So what this does is anyone who's listening from React Native to this topic would receive that data. Okay. And this is the most simplistic approach that we can provide in a demo like this. But this is just a capacitor plugin. So there are many, many capacitor plugins that you can make use of within a web view in a React Native application. This is just the simplest to demo. So if you wanted to take a picture from the web view and you want to make use of the native picture concept, right? Photo concept. That's available by simply adding one of the plugins that we have out of the box.
Okay.
So just know that this is the very simple approach. There are much more complex scenarios that can be created, custom plugins, anything like that. So if I want to listen to this from React Native, though, let's go back to that React Native application in the view where I included the portal view. You can see here, I am subscribing to that topic. And whenever that data comes in, I'm setting state based on that value. Whenever the state gets set, it re-renders and updates the count. And that's what I wanted to show.
Seeing a lot of great questions coming in here. And yeah, we'll take them at the very end. But thank you all. Any other questions that come up, throw them in there. We have plenty of time set aside at the end to tackle this.
Happy to answer as many questions as I can.
Awesome. Thank you, Josh. I'm going to try to steal the screen back. All right, everybody see my screen? Good to go? Awesome. So what do we just see? And I'm just going to take a step back here, is that people and teams we talk to try to do it this themselves. And we talked about the fact that it can be time consuming and costly. There are inherent security risks that take place. You lack some native feature access, and you lack some granular controls for collaboration to make sure that people aren't stepping on each other's toes. What we present, or what we would like to talk to you about with portals, is that, time consuming and costly. Your developers spend a lot of time maintaining this effective communication or adapter between the web code and the React Native code. Portals is a fully managed solution by Ionic. I mean, Josh has been on top of this now for quite a while. We have a dedicated team staying up to date, not just with the React Native shell side of things, but then the WebView, the capacitor side as well, to make sure this works seamless and that your dependencies and plugins will match over time, and really more and more trying to make this as seamless as possible for your development teams. The security risks and vulnerabilities, each portal is kind of incredible. Josh showed it was in an independent web app on its own. These are, apps can be built in isolation, and you can clearly define which APIs and which device features you want to pass. And that React Native shell application retains total control, which is incredible with the portals. Because we're leveraging capacitor and the capacitor web technology, you gain access to a rich ecosystem of native plugins. If anybody's aware, Ionic is heavily involved in capacitor. It's one of our biggest projects out there. Community is fantastic, but we have a lot of first-party support for native plugins and getting access to native functionality. And then what we've learned as we worked with more and more customers over time is that those controls for collaboration are critical to making this a success. As the app scales, as the app grows, we need to make sure that the React Native shell, the React Native piece of it retains control and divvies up control to all the other feature teams in a micro front-end architecture. So we talk, again, I'm just going to take a step back and walk us through this, but we really do believe micro front-end architecture is the way to scale faster and deliver more to your business stakeholders. And what we want to just impress upon is the fact that this is really the solution for scaling your projects and clearing through your feature backlog. It's getting multiple teams to work in parallel, and that the work of those teams is able to be used across your web and your mobile apps. I think that's really going to solve the big problem we're seeing with teams struggling to scale. Because you're building in that fashion in a micro front-end architecture in a parallel way, you're able to launch features at the same time on every platform. Feature parity isn't a question anymore. It's just how fast can you get these features out to your users? What Josh alluded to, which I think we'll spend some time in the Q&A because we have lots of questions on live updates, makes me so excited to talk more about it, is that the moment that features are built and ready to go, there isn't this process of bundling into the rest of the code, testing it, validating, and going. If it works in the web app, it's going to work in the portal. And that's really what Josh was trying to highlight with that separate React web app. That the React web app, because it works on its own, we know it's going to work in the portal. And that's just a fantastic way to run faster. And then one thing I don't want to de-emphasize at all is that building it yourself means that you need to figure out how to get access to all those native features. And because we are leveraging capacitor and the capacitor functionality plugin ecosystem, you get that all right out of the box. So I think Portals is really going to be that powerful solution to help you scale large projects faster and clear your feature backlog. Now, this whole time we've been talking about React Native, it's micro friends for React Native, but I want to close with reminding everybody that Portals will work in any mobile app. 6 months ago, we talked about deploying this for native iOS and native Android. We're now rolling it out to React Native, and we do support Ionic Capacitor as well if you want to break up your capacitor app into micro apps and deploy that as well. If there are any mobile architectures and mobile development technologies we don't show here you'd like us to support, let's talk about in the Q&A. We'd love to learn more. I think Josh is about bringing Portals to the whole mobile ecosystem, so we're excited to see where that takes us.
I just want to interrupt, Vivek. I think that's one of the important things here is that we had always kind of talked about React Native, including this for React Native, but having a couple early customers come to us and say, yes, we need this after our last webinar is really what put the fire under us to say, people have this real need. We need to build it for them. And that's really what pushed React Native or Portals for React Native to be built.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think that's fantastic. And one thing I just want to point out is when I do say on a capacitor here, if you have kind of a legacy Cordova application you need to maintain or keep up to date, that can't be easy to do. You can leverage Portals here as well. I don't want to leave that aside. But really, our biggest push today is if you are developing a React Native and you need to move faster, start building today. Go to ionic.io/portals, log in, create an account, get the portals keys, start building today. We're ready to roll on this front. We'd love to get feedback from the React Native community, how we can help out more. And I think at this point, we're ready to get any questions out of the way. And we have lots of questions, by the way, so I'm just going to go down the list. Let me take a look. Yeah, we've got about 12 questions. So as people ask questions, we let them come in. Actually, I might pause because Diana, you launched 2 polls to this webinar. I'd love to hear any preliminary responses or any thoughts on those polls.
Awesome. Yeah, let's go through that information now. I'm going to go ahead and launch that first poll and share those results. So for those not referencing your screens, I'll go ahead and read this out for the audience. Do you currently use React Native to deploy cross-platform mobile applications? And we had 64% that actually answered no and 36% that answered yes. So really great information to have there. Thank you again, everyone, for participating. Now I'm going to go ahead and share the second poll that we launched here. This one had more options. Once again, if you're not referencing your screen, go ahead and do that now, or I'll read it out for the group. If your team has tried to embed web views into a React Native application, which pain point resonates with you the most? We have a tie here actually with 43% answering difficult and costly to maintain and coordinate. And that is also tied with another high pain point being lacking native feature access. So 36% said security risks and vulnerabilities, 14% lacking granular controls for collaboration, and 24% said other. Just to echo what Vivek mentioned earlier, for those that did respond other, please let us know what other means for you and your teams, and you can insert that information in the chat, connect with with all of us after the fact, but we're here to answer those questions live for you and get that insight into how we can provide a solution. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing that now.
Awesome. Thank you, Diana. I'm going to quickly look through the questions here. And what I'll do is a lot of questions about live updates. I'm going to leave that for the end, actually, because I think we might be able to demo a couple additional items here. But I had a great question about the portal between the web app and the React Native application, Josh. And the question is, how can you send and receive data between the portal and the React Native shell app?
Right. So meaning all I showed was PubSub.
Yeah.
Right. And PubSub is something we provide out of the box because it's difficult for us to make assumptions over what the data structure or what the communication mechanism might look like for a web application to React Native. But we can support any number of things, right? Mm-hmm. So if you look at the capacitor plugins that are provided right now through Core, what the list of them is that it's camera, it's app, it's push notifications, it's a lot of file access. There's a lot of different things that are possible. I think there's like 30 capacitor plugins that are available out of the box and supported by Ionic. But there's a lot of different ways you can communicate from native React Native to web and back and forth. I think what's really important about that, though, is that it's easy for React Native developers to add to their native applications, but it's also just as easy for web developers to be able to add those plugins to the web applications as well.
I think that's related here to a question somebody asked. I think you just answered, Josh, but I just want to repeat. Can they use this to also, can this work with push notifications?
Yes.
Yeah. This is actually a great question that comes up quite a bit. Yeah, so we have developed portals in order to make the communication between that embedded web view and the React Native code much easier. Are we looking at, I mean, if somebody had to go do this themselves, what are the additional steps they'd have to consider when it comes to that communication, Josh, that you were just talking about? I mean, we've definitely made their lives easier through portals.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why this is easy for us, we're making it easier, right, with portals, is that we're also the creators and contributors to Capacitor, right?
Mhm.
And what portals is really an enhanced web view with Capacitor that allows for that facilitating of communication between React Native and web. In order to create something on the same level and have an ecosystem of plugins that you could add, I can't even imagine the level of investment it would take.
Right.
Capacitor is something that we've built and maintained for, I believe, around 4 years now, 4 to 5 years. So we know that this is a battle tested technology that we have worked on for many years that we're just using in new ways now. And we're using in ways to not only build standalone applications, we're building it in ways in order to introduce those web applications that are enhanced into iOS native, Android native, React native applications.
Got it. Thank you. I might even swap screens here because it looks like we're going to have to start to show some code for some of these questions coming up. I'll stop sharing and I'm going to start asking questions here. So question about the portals, do they have to be in the same app? And where is that portals directory located?
So they don't need to be the same app. So you could have 5 different portals in your React Native application, and they could all point to completely independent web applications. Or 3 of them could point to one web application, and the other 2 could point to separate web applications. That's really up to the requirements of your business, right? In the example, this demo that I'm showing is very simple. Later this week, we're probably going to release a more advanced demo with much more complicated scenarios where we're reusing web views across multiple portals, like a single web application across multiple portals. And the way we do that is by supplying initial context data so that you can define the route to be displayed on a specific portal. But sorry, the other part of the question was around probably this, right? The starter.
Yeah.
Yep. So this defines the location within the bundle, right? So as we build the application for iOS, we are copying web files into the bundle that is then distributed through the store. This process of copying the files in currently is done through a build script in Xcode, and we have an equivalent for Android. But what it's doing is you're supplying it an embedded application, which is really like the web application that you're wanting to include, and then the location that you want to write it to. So this is almost a copy paste for every time you would add a new application. But we're working on making this process simpler going forward. But this is the process that we have in place at this point in time.
Thanks, Josh. I'm going to answer a question from an anonymous attendee that asks, can you explain again why this is a micro front end? I think that's a great question. We kind of dove right into the code and the demo as well.
Yep. So the importance of what a micro front end is about allowing multiple teams to have the ability to have complete separation of code, right? Independence of code so that they can be contributed to within an isolated environment, and they can be deployed independently and brought together at runtime. And that's a really important aspect of this, is that you can update your web code independently from your React Native code, and they merge together and they're used together when the application is at execution time, not at build time. Typical ways that people have micro front ends in native applications today is by doing separation of modules. and separation across teams at build time, so that you're still isolated to the same release process. Everyone is still getting on the same bus together and moving at the same speed. But with this process in micro front ends, we've now defined that there are independent teams that can work without having to bring all the code together at build time for the native application. And that those independent teams that are working on web code can do releases on their own timelines using live updates. And this is really why we call this a micro front end, is because it takes on the same characteristics as most micro front ends in web. Being able to tie these together at runtime rather than build time is really the key aspect.
Got it. Okay. So I think there's a lot of now practical questions and tactical questions people ask about how to use Portals. So I'll ask one that's pretty interesting. And the question is, to start a quick migration to Portals, can I have a remote hosted web app to be loaded while using the portal? This seems to be the server hosted option.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again, Vivek? It was about the say it again.
Yeah, so the questions, and actually, let me just see if I can improve. I'm back here. That hopefully helps a little bit. To start a quick migration to Portals, can I use a remote hosted web application to be loaded using a portal?
No.
Yeah.
No. And we draw a hard line there because when you're using portals in a native application, we want you to have the best experience possible for your users. User experience is front and center in native applications. We don't want web to be a second-class citizen in this scenario. And if you allow it to point to an outside server, you're going to feel it as you try to use the application. So we don't want to allow people to get into that scenario.
Totally agree. I think somebody had a light bulb moment, so I want to bring it up. It's not necessarily a question, but just a comment that came through. But when you answer the question about why we consider this to be a micro front-end approach, the question is, if I want, I can actually have each new feature linked to a new portal. And I mean, the answer is yes, that would be our end goal here. That's the micro front-end architecture. The question they ask is, would this be ideal? And I'm guessing they're framing that from a performance point of view or stability point of view.
That's what we would recommend.
Yeah.
Is that as you scale this up, I mean, it's really common for organizations to have feature teams that have responsibility for isolated pieces of a web application, right? That's not new. That's a really common thing that people have done over time. In native applications, it's less common. And so being able to separate your application into separate features and have separate feature teams contribute to those and have the autonomy and independence to deploy whenever they need, I think that is the ideal scenario for the business case. Like bringing that autonomy and the ability for teams to have independence is the key feature of portals.
Good question here about how the portals content or just the web code is working. The question is, will it be cached on the phone, or is being online always mandatory?
It is on the phone. It is not online. So that's what I was saying. Like, we want it on the phone, and we want live updates to publish new versions to the phone. We do not want to worry about being online. Portals need to work in offline scenarios. And they also need to remove the dependence on network for latency reasons. If the code is on device, we're reading from the file system, it's going to be very snappy. And that's exactly what we want.
And I think we're ready to now jump kind of into the demo here. I've been saving all the live updates questions for the end. As we start to get this spun up, somebody did ask about explaining the process of integrating, bundling that portal, that micro front end into the React Native app. So maybe we can talk about how that's happening in runtime and how it's loaded. And I think right there, we're going to go into live updates.
Yeah, so currently what you are required to do is to bundle the web code into the native application when the native application is going through the store. Okay. So you need it as part of the application when it goes to the store. But after you go to the store with it and you have any additional updates that you need to make, those can be done independently with live updates. And I'll show that now, how that works. Okay, let's just make sure, do a little setup here, ensure that we have everything set up correctly. That looks good. All right, so let's make a change now. So we'll go to our web application. And this is bothering me. So it's add 1, 2. Okay, we made that change. Let's add that. That's a commit message that'll make people happy. Okay, we'll push that change up. All right, now let's go to the web. So now we are in AppFlow, right? And this is the thing that we weren't going to show as part of the demo, but we're here, so let's show it. What I've done here is included this repository as part of into AppFlow. And at this case, the configuration is that the web code, this application understands the web code. So I have done a series of builds here. Let's say that, let's go down and do a new build. And you can see here, I have what the app ID is, CDE 08656. And if we go back to the React Native application, you can see that that is the app ID that was supplied to the live update process. So if we were to go back, let's do a new build. And there's my commit message, the terrible message. And we are going to do a web build. Let's do a live update with it and do it to the production channel.
Yeah, so as Josh mentioned, this is a tool, our mobile DevOps tool, our mobile CI/CD tool we use to help deploy the live update. We don't have to go into too much detail on this, but I think it's important people see that it happens. I think, Josh, you're about to show it in real time here.
Yep. And I think one of the really important things here is that you don't actually have to have your React Native application as part of this. This is just the web code. So in this example where I have React Native webinar demo, if you have multiple web apps that are included into your React Native application, they would all be just completely separate. And then if I do a web build of one, I don't have to do it of the other ones, right? So the live updates are independent that way. Getting close.
So, as we're doing that, I think elephant in the room questions. A couple of people have asked us, so it's time to get it out of the way. Live updates. How does the app pass the Apple Store review? If the code is pushed to the device, how are the App Store and Play Store scans involved here?
Sure.
Let's talk about that. So
if you're changing CSS, JS, HTML, Apple doesn't care. That's not native code. It's just important to understand that you can't add things that would be native code. Like you can't change the API of the communication from the web side to the native side because that would require a native change. You can't add additional capacitor plugins as part of a live update because that would potentially ask for new controls, right? New security authentication or authorizations. This is really for updating the JavaScript, CSS, and HTML itself, not reaching outside of that. And it's not something that's uncommon, right? There's lots of companies that do this today. and Apple does it themselves. So they actually have web views in their applications they update independently as well. All right, well, looks like it's completed.
Yeah.
All right, so, oh, yeah, I killed it while we were running. So let's replace.
So while we're doing this, there was a question that popped up on live updates. How will this work in production? Is the change only valid in local development? I think you're about to show if it's working in production.
Yes.
Yep.
Exactly.
There we go.
Okay, and now because the way I have this programmed, it's not going to show it the first time. I'll have to close the app and start again.
Cool. That makes sense.
Because I did
that's
it
typically
on
what we
ad.
expect the user to do, right? That's what
Right.
refreshes that web content. Yeah.
And there we go.
There it is.
So that happened. If you notice, like I didn't rebuild my web app on my local machine.
Right.
I didn't update the bundled code on the local machine. I pushed the update through my repository through live updates. So if we were to actually look at the bundled code for the web application, it would still be TOO. It just so happens that it's correct through the live update process.
Interesting.
Very subtle, but
that's the value we bring with portals.
Right.
Couple of detailed questions here. We'll start to run through them, but we used PubSub in this example. How is PubSub different from Firestore when it comes to React Native?
It's a great question, and I do not have an answer for it.
We'll check with our devs.
Yeah, check with our devs. Firestore is probably like a much more complicated process for including content off device. PubSub that I'm showing here is just a really simple way of communicating between web and native and nothing more than that.
Cool.
You can have different topics for it to have different subscriptions, but yep.
This question came in, and I think you addressed it up front, saying that you were displaying the demo as an example with the monorepo, and it was just to make the demo easier to showcase. The question is, will portals work between two standalone repositories? Absolutely.
It'll work between 50 standalone repositories. The process is getting the difficulty is getting the web code into the native application. We do have a process in place that'll pull down the live updates and include them as part of the native build process. And that's something that will probably show off on our documentation, but it's not something that I showed today.
Got it. Some more detailed questions. I can't promise you I've answered them, but it's good that we get it out there. Something we hear quite a bit, Josh, you're going to love hearing this, is do we have any recommendations for end-to-end testing when it comes to portals and React Native?
That is a great question. I know that there are some examples out there that people typically use for React Native testing. And I'm going to make an assumption that in a lot of those cases, those tools also work in web views. So I would assume that it just works, but I do not have a specific recommendation other than using tools that you're probably already using today.
So for the React Native developer, if you're using, and the name's escaping right now.
I think Detox is one of the common.
Exactly. It should work just as normal.
Okay. I believe they are set up in order to test web views. I know it for Android they are, and I think for iOS it was something that was in process that might be done soon. The other thing you can do is actually test your application independently. So it's just a web application. So if you want to use like any of your web testing tools for it, you can do so. The real testing that you'll want to do for E2E though, or integration testing, is when you'll want to reach for those native tools.
Awesome. Got it. And one more question. This is going to be right in the code. Somebody had just wanted a detail here, Josh. They mentioned how you're making state mutation work in the web part of the code, the React web app. And they have a very specific example that you're using data as count +1 instead of using set count. I can drop this question to you the way they've written it, but it sounds like. Just
I
a
know what
question of
they're-
state mutation.
Yeah, I know what they're asking.
Yeah.
Honestly, that was just me messing with it. So you
No
don't really
worries.
have to do it one way or the other, but here's I'm doing the set count directly
There we go.
afterwards. So I'm just using it here and here. The other way I could do it is const new count
Yeah.
equals count +1, and then just use
New count. Yep.
yeah, that's possible as well.
I think someone was just calling out in your React code, Josh.
That's fine.
Keeping you honest.
I've only written React for 7 years. It's okay.
It's great to be in that position. I'm looking here. It looks like we've gone through most of the questions in the Q&A. If there are any other questions, please keep them coming. We're here to answer everything as it comes up.
Also,
Yes.
something I want to bring up is that if you want to talk about this, talk about using it in your company, the scenario that you have, let's chat. Let's hop on a call sometime and talk through your scenario and see if this will work for you. Yeah, I think we have a process in place on ionic.io/portals if you want to do outreach. And then we can hop on a call and find out if Portals is a great fit for your company.
Yeah, I think that's a great place for us. Let me just check here. Oh, one more question. Yeah, and this is actually a great question to ask. Can we use Portals live updates without AppFlow?
No, it requires AppFlow for live updates.
But what I will mention, this question came from Henny Bester, is that if that is a requirement for you, your company is interested in this, and they're saying, look, we just have an issue with something that's hosted elsewhere, we want to retain control of it, talk to us. We are developing new things every week. We have had customers come to us with this before, so we'd love to talk about your situation and to talk through that. We do, as Josh showcased with the live updates, it needs to be a part of the process somehow to facilitate that change. How it's done, we can talk about that. So Henny, feel free to get in touch with us. I'll drop my information here. You can reach out to us directly. We'd love to talk to you. A quick scan through the chat one more time. It looks like our team has been great in answering some questions directly in the chat. So thank you, Steve, for staying on top of that. Interesting question. I haven't heard this posed before, but the question is, can we use this approach with a Java-based application, web app, and a React Native app?
Ooh, good question. Currently, we only support single page apps as part of this. There's potential you could do it Java-based if you were able. If it's Java-based, it's probably server-side rendered to where the code is being dynamically generated and included at the server side. So that's a tough sell. That's not something we could easily do.
Good to know. We're in the game of maybe moving away from that and really, like you said, strictly focus on device hosted content. We think that's the way to win this.
Yep, for sure.
Loving the questions. Keep them coming in. Like Josh said, we're here to clear everything up. And that seems to be it for now, though. Josh, do you mind if I steal the screen back just to leave it on our closing? Thank you for that. Yeah, so generally, thank you everybody for joining us today. This has been fantastic. A lot of great questions. We were expecting it, entering into kind of a newer territory, talking about Ionic and React Native working together hand in hand to build better mobile apps for enterprises everywhere. Really, the best way to get going is to start building today. Go to ionic.io/portals, log in, create an account, get your Portals registration key, start building, start tinkering. We'd love to hear from you on this. I think with that, I'm going to throw it over to Diana.
Thank you so much to both Josh and Vivek and everyone for participating, not only in the polls, but for coming and joining us today. Just to reiterate, this has been recorded, so you'll have a presentation to reference a little bit later on. Feel free to share it with your colleagues, your teams, and we'll be happy to chat with you again sometime soon. I'd like to call out that I'm about to share in the chat a post-event survey. If you don't mind providing us some feedback as well as any topics you're interested in us producing in the future, we're actively listening to your feedback. So yes, we do look at every single one of the submissions, and we're seeing what ideas you have for us, what you'd like to hear from Ionic, and what we might be able to produce next. So with that, thank you to everyone, and we hope to see you on the next webinar. Have a great day.
Everybody.